All right. First of all, James, thanks for joining us. And, a lot of people, I'm sure you get this question. I know everybody in baseball gets this question. It's like, oh, the off season, you get a chance to relax and kick back a little bit, but it's not like that, especially as the general manager. And it seems like the off season gets shorter and shorter every year, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to have neighbors back in Florida who every year would make that same comment about hey, are you guys going to take some time off? Hey, are you going to take a vacation? And every year had to remind them that no, the off season for the front office in a lot of ways is the opposite. Usually August, September are times when you can get a few longer term projects done, because those are usually months where you can't make trades and you can't do too much to help the major league team. But as soon as the World Series ends, 5 days later, the market's open and the bell rings and we try to get after it.
And you took over as the general manager not too long before. Phone's ringing off the hook.
Yeah, I'll try to put the phone on silent, because otherwise it's going to be an interrupted interview.
Well, if you have a chance to sign somebody and you have to do that rather than this interview, we will completely understand if you're going to re-sign Springer or get JT Realmuto. Well, we won't hold that against you, just so you know.
Noted.
You took over as general manager not too long before spring training. It was kind of a baptism by fire for you. And as we just said, there really is no off season. But do you kind of start to feel like now? I mean, it was a crazy year for a lot of reasons, but you finally feel like you're kind of getting your feet under you now, finally, and have a little bit more familiarity with the organization and what you want to do now?
Yeah, inevitably, every day you're going to get a little bit more comfortable. You're going to get a little bit more used to the relationships, a little bit more used to the rhythms of the office and the group here. But that said, I don't know if I'll ever feel like I fully have my feet underneath me, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, if you get comfortable, you get complacent, and if you get complacent, you stop fighting for that edge. So, from my perspective, obviously, I'm going to lean very heavily on the staff that we have here. We have a lot of very talented people in the front office, and want to give them an opportunity to show what they can do. And getting more comfortable with those relationships every day is going to benefit all of us. But we are always going to be pushing and trying to find that next advantage to put this franchise in a position to compete for a championship.
James, you talk about it being a weird year last year, but who were we watching? Were we watching the 29-31 team? Or were we watching what more of like what we saw in the playoffs? Do you know?
Well, I hope we see the team that showed up in the playoffs. And that was something that all the guys reinforced to me and to Dusty throughout the season, was just get this team in the playoffs, just get us in there. We'll show you what we can do. And I've had a lot of conversations with players and coaches since the season has ended. And in quite a few of them, coaches especially would say, guys, it's not that easy. You can't just get into the playoffs and then all of a sudden turn it on. But you got to give this team a lot of credit. They did just that. And some guys who had some regular seasons that I think that they would be the first ones to acknowledge they were disappointed with were getting some pretty big hits and some pretty big outs for us in the playoffs. And so we obviously have to balance the two of them. We can't expect the team to perform like they did in the playoffs necessarily over 162, but we also don't think that the regular season, with everything that went on, with everything that was different, is representative of how good this team is. We intend to put a team out there on the field in 2021 that's going to compete for a division championship and hopefully get into the playoffs again and turn it on just like they did.
So you're in the middle of your busy season, and if you lump these together as priorities, would it be starting pitching, outfield, or relief pitching? Do you think needs the most help?
Well, the trick of this is that I think all three of them kind of have to be the priority at the same time. And so we are chasing down every opportunity that we can find in all three of those areas. There are going to be some areas where the market is going to move more quickly. I think we've seen the starting pitching market move more quickly than the rest of the market so far. And so the question is, do you get in on that? Do you try to go grab something before maybe the rest of the market moves? Or do you think that that's just the the front of the market moving, and then the rest of it will take a little longer. So it's always a question of balancing, doing something that makes sense right now and getting some of the holes in the team filled and doing some of your shopping before Christmas, or do you want to kind of wait and see what the market will bring and what unexpected things will happen later in the winter? And so we're trying to balance those two things of being aggressive early, but at the same time making sure that we are ready to make some decisions later in the winter as things that we don't anticipate and can't anticipate come to fruition.
Okay.
When you look at the market, and I mean, obviously it's still pretty early. You mentioned some guys are already off the board, particularly starting pitching. Do you see it as being, for the Astros, maybe could be more fruitful going the trade route or the free agency route?
Well, it's always a balance of the two. And this is going to be a very interesting winter, I think, for a lot of teams. And so it's requiring even more conversation with other teams to see what their needs are and what their direction is going to be going forward. And some of that is also based on some of the uncertainty around the game in general, in terms of, what do the playoffs look like in 2021? Are we going to continue to have expanded playoffs? Are we going to continue to have the DH in the National League? And so we're putting in the time and the effort to try to nail down as many of those variables as we can. And the more that we can put a value on, the more that we can isolate that kind of stuff, the more that we can figure that out, that will tend to shift us, to the free agent market or back to the trade market or vice versa. So, and these things change daily. I mean, with the Japanese series ending a week ago, now we've got a lot of guys that are getting posted from Asia. So we have to factor those into the equation as well. And so this is part of the reason that we are probably taking things a little bit more slowly in some areas, is because there are going to be some players that are going to be available that maybe we didn't anticipate being available.
I believe the number is $2 billion that Major League Baseball has said that it lost over the 2020 season as an industry. And obviously, playing without fans, playing just 60-game season, playing postseason games at neutral sites, mostly without fans, all is going to have an impact on the finances and economics. As far as the Astros go, what impact, if any, do you think that could have, and just the economic situation that baseball finds itself in, and also with the uncertainty of next year, how much of that an effect that will have on the market and on what the Astros might be able to do?
Well, obviously on some level you have to factor that in, but at the same time, we have a team that we think is ready to compete for a World Series. We have a starting rotation that I think we feel very good about. We have an infield that we obviously feel very good about. We had some guys in the bullpen step up this year and jump into some roles that I think, if we're being honest, we wouldn't anticipate them being ready for as soon as they were. And so our focus right now is on adding pieces that we need to add to this team to put it in a position, the best position it can be in for 2021, while also balancing the fact that we need to keep the long term of this franchise in mind as well. And so hopefully these vaccines continue to come out there and be effective and can be manufactured, and we can all get back to normal. And so we are focused on putting this team in the best position it can be for 2021, while also not putting ourselves in a position where we're not going to be ready to go in 22 and 23 and 24 and et cetera.
James, does that change your approach any of this offseason with the emergence of Javier and Paredes and Andre Scrub and those guys?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you had asked us at some point early in the season, maybe after Verlander and Osuna got hurt, what is your priority going to be this offseason?
Yeah,
we would have said, a lot of pitching, but at the same time, having Blake Taylor, having Scrub, having Enoli Paredes, having Brooks Raley. I mean, you can go on and on and on down the line. I always hate listing players' names off because I realize afterwards that I forgot 2 or 3 guys, because it was a total team effort. These guys stepped up this year. We added 5 pitchers to the roster before the Rule 5 deadline that we think can help us in the near future. Obviously, we've still got Forrest Whitley out there to provide another layer in the starting rotation, and hopefully he can force our hand and get himself in there. So, having Javier and all of these other guys on the roster changes your priority. Maybe it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive on the position player side because you feel a little bit better about the pitching depth. But we also know with pitching, you can have 5 starting pitchers and it can turn into 3 in a heartbeat. So we do need to prioritize making sure that we recognize that we can't just get through the season with just 5 starting pitchers, and we need to be prepared for having some backup plans there. And hopefully they're guys that are already in the organization and they're ready to step up and compete. But we'll obviously do our job to try to see if there's others out there that we can go get.
Well, if you got to have those backup plans, they're going to be close by now, right? From Round Rock to Sugar Land, you guys are just 25 minutes up the road. What are the benefits of having the AAA team so close by in the suburbs?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Just the consistency also from a player's perspective. These guys who, if they're on the roster the first year or two, a lot of times they will take 2 or 3 trips up and down to the minors as we make, roster moves over the course of the season. And being able to just have a single place of residence in Houston, maybe halfway between Houston and Sugar Land is a huge benefit for these guys. They don't have to pack up. They don't have to live out of a suitcase. You can get used to the neighborhood. You can get used to, where you're living. I don't think you can overstate the benefits of that sort of stability, especially for some of these young kids who are just breaking into their major league careers. And so obviously we're excited about the partnership with the Skeeters. We're excited about the facility. We're excited about the improvements that we can make to it, but the proximity and the stability that it provides for our young players and for our staff, honestly, are huge benefits for us.
Yeah, you mentioned the staff, and I mean, I would have to think it has to help you and others in the front office be able to see more of the minor league guys, particularly at not just Sugar Land, but also Corpus Christi, that's 3 hours away. When you have your coordinators, it just makes everything that much easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And selfishly for me, it means that I can go see the AAA team and get home and still see my family that same night. I mean, those of us who have gone to see minor league teams know that usually what happens is you're out there for 3, 4, 5 days, and that's another road trip. And it puts a strain on the families for the front office. But, the ability for our big league coaches to, if they want to, maybe go see some of the AAA guys during the day before maybe a night game or on an off day or something like that is another benefit. Obviously, we were happy with Round Rock and really appreciate everything that they did for us. And, I personally never got a chance to get out there because of the pandemic and everything that happened this season. But, you talk to people around here who had the experiences with Round Rock and they sing the praises of that group and that organization. But the opportunity to have a partnership with the Skeeters and the geographic advantages and the facility advantages was just too much to pass up on.
You mentioned adding guys to the 40-man roster, 5 guys added ahead of that Rule 5 draft deadline. So they're going to be protected from that. Of course, these were guys who didn't pitch or didn't play in the big leagues last year and didn't play in the minor leagues either, since there was no minor league season. How much more difficult did that make some of those decisions in terms of just figuring out who to protect on the 40-man?
Well, you just have to rely on your staff that much more, and you have to rely on the guys who know these kids, the scouts who sign them, the coaches who have been around them, the people who know the work ethic, who know what these kids are capable of when things get back to normal. And so there were a couple of kids that were coming back from injuries, and so we had to factor that in as well. But one of the advantages of having a lot of the technology that we have in the game these days is that you can do player assessments without necessarily having to see them in as many live games as maybe you would have 5 or 10 years ago. And so we try to take advantage of much of that as well. But this all comes back to trusting your people, trusting your staff, your scouts, your coaches, your other front office members to say, these are the guys that we need to protect. And then you also have to factor in that sometimes the best way to protect these young kids is actually not to add them to the roster, because if you don't add them and another team takes them in the Rule 5, that other team has to keep them in the majors for the entire season. Whereas if you add them to the roster, you can send them to the minors. And so if later on you need a roster spot, another team can claim them on waivers and send them to the minors. And so in a weird way, not putting guys on the roster sometimes is the best way to protect them and keep, we say protect. What I mean is keep them in the organization. And also, you don't want to rush some of these kids. A lot of these kids get put on the roster because teams are worried about losing them in the Rule 5. And then they burn through their minor league options before they're ready to be a contributor at the major league level. And so it's a balance of all of these factors, trying to make that decision about whether to put these kids on the roster. And so, just because somebody was not added to the roster doesn't mean we think any less of them. It may be one of these other factors that came into play that forced our hand.
And by adding those 5 guys, you now, I believe, have 38 on your roster, so 2 spots open. Does that make it a little more difficult to be players in the Rule 5 draft next week?
No, with the 2 open spots, we'll be aggressive and take a look at guys who will make sense for us. But at the same time, anybody that you add, you can't take them off for the rest of the winter. They have to get a tryout in spring training. And then if we want to keep them in the organization, they have to be on the active major league roster, that 26-man roster for the entire season. And so when you are competing for a championship and every roster spot is critical, you need to have 26 guys that can contribute and help you win games right now. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult for us to take those players on when maybe the reason that they're not on the roster is because their previous organization doesn't feel like they're quite ready to contribute at the major league level yet. And so, again, that goes back to that game of who's ready, when are they ready, can you have them on the roster, is it going to force your hand elsewhere, what are the costs of that, et cetera. So we try to factor that all in, but with the 2 empty roster spots right now, we will definitely take a hard look at the Rule 5 and see if there's guys that can help us win in 2021.
You mentioned protecting somebody on the roster. Peter Solomon falls into that category that was hurt last year. And I just keep thinking about last year that was so abbreviated and you had some injuries. How are you guys going to look at limiting pitchers' innings going forward in a full season?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And fortunately, we have medical personnel and we have coaches who have some experience with this. And it's also something interesting about these guys that are maybe coming over from Asia, where they were able to play a full season. Do you think that these guys who played more games over there are willing to give you or able to give you more bulk in 2021 than some of these guys that were limited to 60, 70 innings or something like that? But we're going to take a hard look at it, but we have some very smart people in the medical field who are going to keep an eye on these kids over the course of the season and make sure that when they get to that point, when they're getting to 120, 130, 140 innings, when it's a real increase over the previous year, that we can make sure that they're not doing anything to put themselves in harm's way.
All right, we'll have more with James Click, Astros General Manager, as Astroline continues right after this. All right, part 2.
Just a second. How many minutes was that, Robert?
That was about 16, 17 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So about 10 or 12 minutes here, probably.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
I'll try to keep the answers a little shorter.
No, those are great.
Actually, no,
Those
it's
are
great.
fantastic.
Honestly, yeah, seriously, it's great.
The longer the better.
Yeah.
All right, I'll filibuster. I'll just start reading the dictionary.
Now you're
Yeah, I
talking.
mean, hey, that's more time for us to eat wings at Pluckers while this is playing. So it's quite all right.
Yeah, and the Carbach is nice and cold, so
Yes.
keep it going.
I haven't had lunch yet. Don't talk about the wings. I'm hungry.
Fair enough. All right. Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Once again, joined by Astros General Manager James Click, and I wanted to ask you about a few players, particularly Yordan Alvarez. Of course, only played a couple of games last year. Had the knee surgery at the end of August on both of his knees. I know he's posted some videos on social media of on a treadmill and things like that. So that's obviously encouraging. Where is he at right now with his recovery, and how much does he factor into the outfield picture potentially? Because I mean, obviously he hadn't played a whole lot there in the past, and his knees were always an issue before.
Yeah, first of all, he's doing great. He is getting after his rehab. I'm glad he posts those videos on social media. We get some of those videos and some other ones just to keep an eye on him. It's obviously a little tricky keeping an eye on players on rehab, given everything else that's going on in the world right now. But the videos are great. All the reports are great that he is really getting after it. And I think anybody that's been through injury rehab before knows that the surgery is only step one, and where you can really make a difference and set yourself up for success is by getting after that rehab. And the effort that he is putting in is impressive. So He is on track to be fully ready to go for spring training, which is obviously tremendous news to have his bat back in the lineup. And in terms of what that means for outfield, we're going to wait and see. We're going to wait and see what his rehab leads to, and obviously talk to our medical personnel and him and ask him, how are you feeling? Is this something that you feel like you can do on a regular basis? And if we can get him out there, even if it's in the beginning, only a couple days a week, it fills a big need.
Josh James was in the rotation to start last season, and after 2 starts, wound up moving to the bullpen and had more success there. Was in the bullpen in the postseason, and that's kind of been a question about Josh James, the last couple of years or so going into the season. Is he a reliever? Is he a starter? Do you feel like there's a little bit more clarity in terms of what Josh James' role could be after what we saw last year?
Not necessarily. I think right now our focus is making sure that he's fully recovered from the hip surgery that he had.
Right.
And he's another guy who's he's got a longer rehab in front of him. We don't anticipate that he'll be ready for opening day, but hopefully soon thereafter he'll be able to get back out there. A lot of it is going to be a conversation with him, and what is he able to do? What does he want to do? What does he think that he can bring to the table? I think that with the stuff that he has, it's always going to be tempting to put that in the rotation. It's always going to be tempting to say, hey, what if we can get 5, 6, 7 innings out of this guy every 5th day? But at the same time, the value that he can provide in the bullpen of being a potential shutdown reliever late in the game is real as well. And so, we'll have a conversation with him. We'll have a conversation with Strami and Josh, obviously, and try to figure out what's the best way to maximize his potential.
I want to ask you about Yuli Gurriel. So the last few years before you got here, you watch Yuli Gurriel, and I'd be hard pressed to think of anybody on that offense that you would want up in a clutch situation. And we saw his first really prolonged slump as a Houston Astro, and it lasted for quite a while. Are we watching an aging player, or was there something going on physically, mechanically, that gives you a positive vibe about him next year?
Well, I think the positive vibe is just who he is as a person and how good of a hitter he's been for how long he's been a good hitter. Obviously, it's going to be incredibly difficult to draw conclusions based on the season that we just had. We already talked about, were we watching a 29-31 team, or were we watching a team that, got to Game 7 of the ALCS? And so without fans in the stands, without that energy in the ballpark, without, that emotion that comes with those kind of situations, I think it's incredibly difficult to assess how guys are going to play going forward. And when you're faced with that, I think that all of us want to lean on sort of the longer track record that we have with these guys. And it's not just Yuli. There were a lot of guys who had regular seasons that I think that they, again, would be the first to admit wasn't what they were used to and what they think they're capable of. And some of that is just being in these empty ballparks. And I know obviously our fans didn't get a chance to experience it. I cannot tell you how weird it was. And that was just me sitting, in the stands or upstairs a little bit. That lack of energy from the crowd for me was really noticeable. And I know it was for the players as well. So, we'll obviously, see what the new year brings. But I think it's really hard to draw conclusions based on a 60-game season in that scenario in particular.
Well, Dusty leaned on Martin Maldonado quite a bit last year, and I think in a 162-game schedule anyway, you'd be hard-pressed to think a catcher could keep that up for that long. But it was so important because he had so many young pitchers to have somebody like him in there. And I get that, but it'd be kind of ludicrous to think he could do that in the course of a full season. You got Garrett Stubbs on the roster, and that's it. You're gonna go after some experience, I would imagine.
Well, if you ask Martin, he said he's ready to catch 180, 190 games next year. So
right.
we're banking on that, and we'll see what else we need. Plus, maybe it's a free roster spot if you only need one catcher, right?
That's right.
So no, look, the catching position is obviously pretty brutal physically on these guys. We believe in Stubbs. We like Stubbs. He's a young guy. These young guys maybe can surprise you. Dusty always likes to talk about his surprise guys in spring training. And maybe Stubby's one of those guys for us this year. But at the same time, we will definitely keep an eye on the market as we do for all these positions. And, having some depth there, I think, is the prudent course of action, just given what we know happens to catchers over the course of 162 games.
You mentioned Dusty Baker. And I know it's still relatively early in the off season, but what has the communication been like between the two of you? Do you talk a lot about potential roster construction and things like that as the off season has continued?
Yeah, although Dusty just got back from a 10-day trip to Hawaii, so most of our conversations over the past week or so have been him sending me pictures from the farmer's market and telling me what he's gonna cook that night. So, I'm stuck here in Houston. It's a cold and rainy day today, so I tried not to call him too much because I didn't want to hear about the weather in Hawaii. But no, we talk, if not every day, definitely a couple times a week. Knowing what he thinks of the roster, of the players, it's critical. This is a partnership, and I don't want to go out there and start chasing down a trade or a free agent that you get maybe a little ways down the road, and Dusty says, well, hold on, did you think about X, Y, and Z, or hey, I know that player and that's guy that maybe you don't want in the clubhouse for whatever reason. And so I'm going to lean heavily on Dusty and his expertise and his knowledge of the game and the players. And then beyond that, like he knows everybody in baseball. And so if you need to know a little bit about some of these guys that are out there, because if you're making a trade or if you're signing a free agent, you're signing a person and you're signing a family. And, Dusty knows, if he doesn't know them personally, he knows somebody who does. And so obviously I'm going to get that information and put that into the calculus before we make any moves.
When you talk about making moves, obviously there are free agents who have qualifying offers attached to them. There are free agents who don't. The ones who do, you lose a draft pick if you sign them. Of course, the Astros do not have a first or second round pick in the 2021 draft. Does that make you a little more wary of guys who have that qualifying offer attached to them and the potential loss of another pick?
Yeah, it's always a sliding scale. If you can quantify what that draft pick is, and actually we would, because we were technically over the line on the competitive balance tax, we would lose our second overall pick in 2022 and our fourth round pick this year in 2021. And so as we're trying to make sure that the farm system continues to pump out talent, those picks are critical to that effort. And so signing a player who is going to result in you losing 2 draft picks and beyond that, also $1 million in international spending money. So, the CBA is in place to incentivize certain behavior, and we have to take that into account before we make decisions. But at the same time, it's a sliding scale. If you can sign these guys who turned down qualifying offers for less than maybe somebody who didn't, you have to try to determine, is that difference worth the draft picks and the international signing money that you would have to sacrifice.
Hey, if everything keeps going in the right direction, say we get the vaccines and the pandemic starts to slow and starting to flatten the curve, what would spring training start to look like, you think?
That's a great thing to think about. Right now we are planning on being in West Palm Beach in early February as scheduled. And it may be a situation where it's a slow process of opening things up. The vaccines rightly should go to the workers, the medical workers who are on the front lines. And then after that, honestly, they probably ought to go to the high risk people as well. I'm not in a position to say like who deserves this thing or who needs it or where it should go first. But we'll be patient. Whenever we can get it. I know that we'll be excited about a little bit more freedom and looseness. As far as social distancing and being able to hang out. That's something that we're all looking forward to, and that Dusty and I have talked a lot about. Just lamenting the fact that we didn't get to know the players and their families in particular this year. But right now we're planning on spring training being as scheduled in early February, and if that means it's still wearing masks and it's still doing some social distancing while we kind of wait for our turn when it's appropriate for baseball, then we'll do that. But that's our plan right now.
And I'm crossing my fingers for a return of a couple of guys Gary Pettis and Joe Smith. What can you tell me about them?
Gary's doing great. And, he's been assured by his doctors that even if he's still undergoing treatment, that his right arm and his left arm will still be able to kind of do that windmill motion. He'll be fine as far as that's concerned. So he's in good spirits. Obviously, it was awesome to see him in the playoffs, even from afar. But yeah, he's doing great. I talked to him week or two ago, and he's in great spirits. And actually just talked to Joe Smith earlier today, and he's enjoying the off season, but he's trying to figure out how to get ready to go because he's obviously had a longer layoff than everybody else, but he's excited. He's excited to get back out there and join the team again. And I think he's mostly excited about getting down to Florida and getting out of Ohio and getting away from the snow.
Yeah.
Certainly can understand that. James Click, we're certainly looking forward to a 2021 season that hopefully will be more like the seasons we're accustomed to being around. I think everybody in baseball feels that way, but certainly thanks for joining us. And it's just nice to be another day closer to whatever the new normal looks like, right?
Yeah, 100%. It can't get here fast enough. So, don't let the door hit you on the way out 2020.